Hi there, and welcome to Al and Merrill.
My name is Merel, and I like to do deep dives into the latest research on neurodiversity.
And I'm Alistair, psychotherapist. I love creating metaphors and stories to help make sense of it all. And together we're going to be exploring the fascinating world of how neurodiversity shapes our lives. So let's dive in. So this episode of Al and Merrill is brought to you by mycopilot.ai for when your willpower won't. So you know those 2 a.m. moments when you're caught doom scrolling and you know that you should really be going to bed? Or the sofa after work where you've collapsed and you're stuck on your phone? Well, My Copilot AI is your personal AI co-pilot that will help you get on with the things that you really want and need to do in those moments, whether that's doing the laundry, getting on with your projects or hobbies, or going to bed. Check it out at mycopilot.ai.
Just a note to say that we're explorers and storytellers. This podcast is not intended as therapy, advice, recommendation, or medical authority. We are just like you, inviting you along on our journey of trying to make a little sense out of fascinating research on neuroscience and neurodiversity as best as we can.
Hello.
The hello thing. So, yeah, I've been listening to the Huberman Lab podcast for the past few weeks. So I've heard about it from a friend of mine. He was listening to it, very enthusiastic about it. And it's a professor at Stanford in, I think, neurobiology or something related at least. And some episodes he just does on his own. He just talks about something that he has read a lot about or knows a lot about. And some episodes he invites a person, like another professor, and interviews them about it. So the podcast only contains people who know like the most of some specific topic, people who know so much, and then kind of condense it into something that's actually understandable. And everything relates to either the brain or physical health or...
Don't worry about our podcast, just go fuck off.
Yeah, just go. Please go listen to that one. So yeah, recommendation, please listen to that one.
In fact, there's enough people mentioning it now that I feel like, how do you spell it? It's not on Spotify.
It is.
Oh, I think I was searching in my... He hasn't done anything in 2024. He has. For some reason, Spotify opened it up, scrolled down to December 2023, where he talks about the origins of autism.
Maybe you've opened that at some point in the past.
Or maybe it's been listening to me and it knows and it's gone, oh,
That's what you're interested in.
It's going to be the most compelling for you.
Yeah, but yeah, it's about all kinds of things related to health. It's pretty interesting.
That's the Perel. So what are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, so we were going to talk about autoimmunity. I've read, I think, about 6 articles this week.
I thought we were talking about the RCCX again, and I was like, we sort of talked about this now. Although I did a bit of a deeper dive into it and was like, oh, okay.
That's right. I think it strongly relates. So it like the autoimmunity was kind of a continuation on that topic, right? I mean,
as a segue.
It's very much related to the same, but since at least, well, I'm curious what you read. Then did you just read a McGlathry?
No, I mean, in fairness, I just got I had a long conversation with GPT that was just asking about different parts of it and like diving into different bits of it. But so some of it might be hallucinated. We're not we live in a world partly because of Twitter and partly because of the hallucinations in AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the last time when we were talking about the RCCX, then I was trying to find articles about that and basically stranded after that one article by Karen and
yeah, I wonder how much of it's like on Reddit and in conversations, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's not too many papers about it, there's actually no papers about it, but there's a
discussion somewhere,
blog,
but we don't know where the discussion is. So, but ChatGPT's gone and scraped it for us. So, search engine. I think the bit that I kind of saw, I kind of went into a bit was like, so I was curious, like, why is this area so subject to CNVs, count number variations, basically like, you know, replications, deletions, and all sorts of weird stuff like that. And the top thing it came up with, so there's like a few genes that are particularly relevant for neurodiversity, and one of the ADHD genes is right at the top because it's the autoimmune gene, or it's not the autoimmune, but it's associated with hypermobility and autoimmune, and ADHD. And that one is well in the RCCX cluster. And I was reading that and was like, yeah, that's me, because I've got hyperlaxity and like all my joints are bendy and I've got autoimmune conditions. and I've got ADHD and I've got autism, and I'm like, yeah, okay. So yes, there's kind of a segue there from this RCCX straight into autoimmune stuff. So I mean, the interesting thing I think that I was thinking about while reading this was I was sort of trying to weave it into that little theory again of like farming and animals, because we also have loads of animals. Like we husband animals in human culture. Like we domesticated animals, right? So there's a book that I really like by a guy called Jared Diamond. So he's kind of like a social anthropologist. Don't know if you read him. He's interesting. He's like an anthropological historian, and he comes up with some very interesting challenges to previous narratives. And one of them is called Guns, Germs, and Steel, and it's about basically. So he wrote the first one about collapse. Why do cultures, civilizations collapse? But with the assumption that it's nothing to do with the psychology of the people involved. So his assumption is like assuming that any human being in the same situation and conditions would act more or less similarly. Let's stop being like, oh, great man theory of history and, you know, all that sort of stuff. Like, let's just look at the raw conditions and environments and see whether that tells us anything. So his first book was called Collapse. And it was like, you know, why does stuff collapse? His second book was called Guns, Germs, and Steel. And it was about why different empires basically beat out other ones. And one of the big stories there is that the West in particular, like Europe, was really intense farming because we got really good soil, but also really lots of animals, like lots of domesticated animals in tight proximity. So we lived very close to these animals. It was kind of cold. So during the winter, we literally, you know, put them in a house and we would live on the floor above them so that the heat from the animals would rise up and keep us warm overnight. And his argument is that the biggest evolutionary pressure on Europeans was no longer intelligence, but immunity, because we were so close to basically just like, you know, total pathogen, multiple different species just passing shit around all the time. And that actually that immunity was the biggest pressure on us, which is why we also then dominated the world, because we would go to, say, North America, and we didn't win really by force of arms. We just took the plague with us, and everyone there died when we gave them our blankets. And there's all sorts of dodgy stories about that. But basically, the first time that Westerners, like Europeans, went to Central America, like is it not the Aztec, the Mayan Empire, it was absolutely thriving. The second time we went, it was gone because the first lot had introduced so much disease that it just completely destroyed them. I mean, there's this thing about water as well. So you know, there's lots of interesting stories there, but part of it, I've heard the theory that it's basically our germs. So immune pressures in Europe, big variability, big pressure, autoimmune systems. So I'm really curious in all of this discussion that we're going to have or having is also like how much of this is a European thing? Like when we talk about neurodiversity, is this a global thing or is it a European thing? Because as far as I know, all the research is basically done on white people, and it's like, you know, that's European history. I haven't got a clue how prevalent neurodiversity is in Africa, you know, in the Far East, in the Middle East. I have no idea.
I did find an article on the relationship between vitamin D3 and
Really?
I think it was autism specifically, where they did three things, basically. They compared the baseline vitamin D3 level between autistic children and non-autistic children, and they found that the autistic children had, on average, significantly lower D3 levels. Also, that the amount of D3 found in all the children, or I think in the autistic children specifically, was correlated with the scores that they had on like the level of autistic traits.
So
So
the lower the
there's
D3,
several tests that kind of measure, for example, language scores and interaction scores and sensitivity scores or whatever, and that the amount of vitamin D3 that they had in their body is correlated, negatively correlated. They were more autistic basically when they had lower levels of D3. And also that if they supplemented the children with vitamin D3 for 3 months, then their scores improved on these tests, like
wow.
on the tests. So that basically the point is vitamin D3 is very strongly correlated with autistic traits and also with the autism diagnosis.
So this begs a question then, it sort of immediately for me, like, I'm like, so first off, wow. And second off, like, oh my God, does that mean there's a pill? Like literally a pill?
To some extent, yes.
Wow, okay. I'm going to take more of that. Let's see what happens. And then-
Also, part of what the article says is that this research was performed on children between 3 and 11 years old, something like that. So pretty young children. And it also mentions that vitamin D3 is very important for brain development. So in the part of your life when your brain is fully developing or is developing a lot, then vitamin D3 is super important for that development. So that it might be the case that vitamin D3 supplementation is much more effective to give to young children with autistic traits than that it would be for adults. So it's not saying that is not useful for adults, but it is highly likely that it's much less impactful for adults because their brain is just less developing than in young children. Still, yeah. But I mean,
So
I think it's an important side note.
this is interesting because then it's like, is autism then somewhat a treatable childhood condition? And does that suddenly mean that we have obligations to treat them? Or, should we be giving all kids in school who are scoring highly on autism like free vitamin D3? Are we doing it on the parents, in which case you've got like social issues around, like if you're in poverty, you deal with it, and if you're rich, great, you can sort of escape some of the impacts. Lots of implications there.
I think this would be like in terms of, so we've spoken about, for example, ADHD medication before, like giving children Ritalin because it's supposed to fix their brain to some extent. But I think this is kind of a different.
It feels different, doesn't it? Vitamin 3 and Ritalin.
Also, because it's not
different
specifically
things.
targeting. Also, it's not targeting autism specifically. Like vitamin D3 is useful
Just
for
good.
so many things in the body.
Especially Northern Hemisphere, all of us are basically vitamin D deficient during large parts of the year,
Exactly.
according to what our bodies would really like. Like, it's a thing. Doctors would say, like, that pretty much everyone in the Northern Hemisphere should be taking vitamin D3 for about 6 months of the year.
Exactly. So yeah, it's not that we're treating
Put it
children
in the water.
for autism if we're doing that. It's it's generally good for
Is
the
it a
body.
treatment or is it a supplement? Then there's a bit of a
Yeah,
distinction.
exactly.
I
It's
think
definitely a supplement.
there's some stuff there. The other question that comes up for me is like, wow. Hold on, what is vitamin D3? What does it do? What's it? I don't know. Like, I kind of want to understand vitamin D3 more, because at the moment we're talking about how it influences and changes and impacts stuff. But like, what is it really under the hood?
I'm also not an expert on vitamin D or vitamin D3. Well, obviously, it's mainly derived from sunlight, but there's also some foods that it's in. It serves many functions. Surprise, surprise. Acting as a hormone vital for calcium metabolism, neurodevelopment, immune modulation, antioxidation, apoptosis. Yes.
I think I've heard that word before. I don't know what it means though.
And neurodifferentiation and gene regulation. At least we can say that it's important for many, many things.
This is so. And by the way, apoptosis is cell death. Like, it's a type of cell death that occurs when
Right,
a series
so
of molecular steps in a cell lead to its death. So it's sort of random cell death. That's the broad spread of stuff, right? Which kind of comes back to what we, I think, spoke about last time a little bit, which is with the RCCX cluster again. It's like all of this stuff. It feels very systemic, right? It feels like the way that this plays out is that some fundamental, like, characteristics of how bodies behave at a kind of biochemical level, right, has consequences in how we then think, like cognition, right? Because that cognition is built on top of all of that stuff, right? So with the immune stuff, especially like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hypermobility, highly correlated with ADHD. There's, from a psychological lens or a psychotherapeutic lens, it's been someone suggested, I can't remember who it was, that, if your body can't keep itself together, like in a stable configuration, how would you expect your sort of sense of self, your mind, your identity to keep itself in a stable configuration if you're constantly shifting anyway? Like, how would you learn that, like, mentally, if you never learnt it physically, because you're actually a bit all over the shop? So I'm wondering, I don't know. I don't really know where this point's going to lead, but it's kind of this just sort of feeling that a lot of this stuff is about like fundamental stuff. Like if you're slightly overly bendy, then maybe the thing that drives that makes your nerves slightly overly something similar. And then that impacts like your nervous system. And then if vitamin D is so important for like calcium and like the basic chemistry that cells use to do stuff, then wherever those chemical Lego blocks get used, everything that sits on top of them could wobble a bit. And then you get expressions coming up through it. And maybe neurodiversity, this cluster of phenomena, because it's not like a thing, right? It's a cluster of stuff. It's a big bucket of behaviors. Maybe they're just our way of saying, yeah, when something gets a little bit woo under the surface, it like percolates up and minds get affected and in all these interesting different ways. And there could be multiple routes into that. It's like the neurological or psychological adaptation to instability or things being a bit out of equilibrium or some kind of like energy deficits, whatever the mechanism is, maybe brains just have a certain stable configuration to adapt to difficult environments, like difficult internal chemical environments. And we see those as similar, but actually they're all the same adaptation being applied to different underlying causal things. So much of this, you end up finding out like it affects so many things. And it makes it really hard to kind of tell the story because there's no clear story. It's like, oh yeah, this layer is like a bit wobbly, and then the layer above it is a bit wobbly, and then the layer above it is a bit wobbly, and then you've got your mind on top of that, and that's a bit wobbly. Like, woo, great storytelling. Like, so we know it's important, but how does it track through?
In what way? Yeah. So vitamin D3 is also important for the immune system. And if that is dysregulated, then the immune system does like things that you don't want it to do. Inflammation, yeah, it can be dysregulated in so many ways, and there's multiple things dysregulated, and maybe it happens in different times in development, or it influences the hormones in a different way, and that might also be the cause of the existence of the spectrum, so to say. So the different ways that autistic people or people with ADHD or both are so different from each other because the ways that all of these things, the vitamin D3, the deficiency, the inflammation, the hormone imbalances, all of these things interact with each other and kind of, they're all dysregulated, but they can be dysregulated in all kinds of ways which interact with each other. And so then it makes a lot of sense that all autistic or ADHD or all ADHD people are so different. Like they're all dysregulated at all these points, but in different ways or in different periods.
Regulation is what defined. How does a body know that it's dysregulated?
Why should it know?
Does it consider itself dysregulated, or is it just like doing what it does in that chemical environment?
No, I don't.
What does it mean to be dysregulated?
If you have inflammation in your brain in terms of...
But I don't think that, like, how does my body know that inflammation is bad?
If
And
you're
in fact,
attacking
is
it.
inflammation bad? Like, inflammation exists for a reason, right? It's trying to protect things.
True. Yeah,
So
sure.
I think bodies can get into a situation, I think it's quite common, where a particular type of response is like good for now and considered good for now, like an inflammation response. But when it stays long term, then it has consequences that start beginning to undermine other parts or even that part of the body, right? So there's a question between so the body may well be going, hey, this is actually a good thing. I'm not dysregulated. This is a good thing. This is how I regulate. What are you talking about? But then we, in our kind of storytelling human capacity, look at this and go, yeah, but chronically, right? The consequence of that is that you're not regulated, because when we compare it to other people, we can see that that's a dysregulation. But the body doesn't have that comparison with other people. It doesn't go, oh my goodness, I'm dysregulated because those 1,000 people over there aren't doing it like I'm doing it. Like, bodies are just busy being like, I'm just doing my thing. La la la, I'm going along. Oh, I should make some information over there because that feels like the right thing to do right now. So I think we can get into positions or situations where our bodies really maintain some kind of a reaction response that it genuinely thinks is the right thing to do. But we know, as storytelling humans doing research and comparison, and we can get the data from other people, and we go, oh, that's actually turns out that's not so great. So somewhere in there is this kind of a question and understanding. I'd be really interested in finding out more about how inflation and neurodiversity link, because like I've been a raging hippie for quite a while, and I'm kind of less hippie at the moment, but that's kind of like the circles I kind of spent most of my adult life in. And there's a lot of conversations about like healing that they're not trying to find sort of scientific answers or rigorous scientific answers, because a lot of the exploration is much more about the lived experience. And there's a lot of healing modalities and healing advice out there. So people are trying to heal like their psychology as much as their physicality, but in applied ways, like not necessarily bothering so much about building the research from bit by bit because it takes too long. And inflammation is a word that turns up all over the shop. It's so commonly referred to. And gut health. Inflammation and gut health are like the two things that I think stand out to me as common culprits. So
Yes, I
I'm
agree.
wondering whether we can do a deep dive on inflammation and neurodiversity.
Yeah. So maybe it's good to start with one article that's basically explaining one of the mechanisms that is important, like not yet related to ADHD, but rather like why does autoimmunity occur? Like what is important to understand in how it happens. And it basically introduces three concepts. And to be honest, I don't really understand the difference between two of them, but I'll get to that later. So one important one is molecular mimicry, which occurs when similarities, I'm going to read this from my screen, occurs when similarities between foreign and self-peptides lead to autoreactive T or B cell activation by pathogen antigens. So that basically means that there's an antigen in the body, so a foreign thing that has entered the body, but and the T and B cells of the body are responding to that antigen, right? They're detecting the
So an
antigen.
antigen
They're
acts like
going to,
bacteria or something, right?
yeah, it's a bacteria, it's a virus. It can also be something that, like, if you have a transfusion or a surgery, whatever, like something comes into the body that is not the body itself, then this is detected on the cell membrane. There's things present that the body detects as not being the body. Then it creates TMB cells to attack their cells. And then, well, that's the immune system that is being cleared up. But what can happen is that these peptides, so the things that are found on the membrane of the intruding cells, are super similar to the peptides on some tissue of the body, are extremely similar. So that's what called molecular mimicry. It's that the foreign peptide is basically the same as the peptide on some body tissue, which means that the T and B cells that have been generated to attack the foreign cells also will destroy the tissue that has the peptides
Okay.
that look the same, right? So that's
Is there an
one.
example that we might know
I'm pretty sure that there were examples, but I didn't remember them. But this is one of the mechanisms that are one of the main causes for autoimmune things happening.
One of three, yes? So
Yes, one of
rheumatic
three.
fever
Sure.
is a classic example of molecular mimicry resulting in post-infectious autoimmunity. So you get streptococcal infection, the infection goes away, but you still have a fever because your body's going, oh, but hold on, there's some other stuff in my body that I think is still, that looks a lot like
Exactly.
streptococcus.
Oh yeah,
and
that's
therefore
actually a good
homegrown.
point. It's a good point what you said there, that this is all about post-infectious autoimmunity. So this is all about the body has been affected by something, has an immune response, and then has autoimmune things happening. It is also possible that you don't have an infection, like that it isn't caused by an infection. But for example, immune things can, for example, also pass the blood placenta barrier. So it can also, for example, be that a mother has had infections in the past that passes the blood placenta barrier to the child and then stuff occurs. So it doesn't mean that the child must have had this infection.
Okay. So the
Specifically.
mother's body's like inoculating the fetus against this bad thing, but the fetus goes, okay, fine. Oh no, shit, I've got some of this in me already. Oh no. But it turns out
I
that
suppose.
that's actually the self. Okay.
Yeah. So molecular mimicry is important. And then I don't really understand the difference between bystander activation and antigen spreading, but they both seem to kind of mean that there are specific T and B cells activated to kill the intruders, but that other T and B cells are also activated because they're present in the same tissue. So that there's T and B cells present in some part of the body. They're activated to kill some intruders. And and then there's other T and B cells that actually are meant to attack something else, but because they're close or whatever or similar, I don't know, they also are activated and they go attack the thing that they're meant for, which is not actually the intruder.
Okay, so that makes me think like a pack of street dogs, and one of them gets into a fight with, or like a classic bar brawl in a Western where like two people have a fight and then suddenly the entire bar is having a fight because it kind of like pissed off the next guy, and the next guy swung at some random guy, and then it just sort of carried on from there. And then you end up with the whole bar having a fight, which is sometimes what an immune system, autoimmune condition can feel like, I think, for some people. It's like, can you stop fighting already? Like, what's interesting, so I know exactly when my vitiligo turned up. So I have vitiligo, which is an autoimmune response where my melanin gets attacked. But I get it in like very small specific patches. And some people get it like in really big like blotches over their whole body. Apparently Michael Jackson had this, and that's why they can't, like he bleached his skin or whatever it was he did, was to not look blotchy. I know that mine turned up when I was sat on a boat in Egypt. We went on a family holiday to Egypt, and we went on a boat, and we were on the boat in the Red Sea for ages, and I didn't put any sunscreen on. I got absolutely burnt to a cinder by the sun. And after that, I had these spots on my body where basically I think like, and particularly around moles. So I think and I think moles are an interesting things themselves. I think because they're kind of like some kind of protection mechanism that the body, whatever is in the middle of the mole, it goes, ooh, well, we're going to wrap that in something to prevent it from moving anywhere. It gets shoved out. That I think, I don't know. I'd be interested in finding out more about moles. But I have lots of moles, and some of them have now got these white patches around them where basically the melanin around there went big, and my immune system went, whoa, people, not a chance, and just killed all the melanin in the area to be like, no, we're going to protect from that. So I don't know which one of those that would be. That's triggered intrinsically, like my own body overproduced something, which then freaked out my immune system.
Yes, that wasn't really an intruder, but there was a
No.
response to some external.
Yeah, but it's not like an external peptide coming in.
It wasn't an intruder, but there was a stimulus for your body to
the stimulus
respond.
was external, but it's almost like if my immune system is like the police, then there were suddenly all of these melanin pigments running around in me, and the police basically overreacted like they sometimes do when they get worried and go, oh no, this is a riot. And it's like, no, it's not really a riot at all. These things are doing a job. They are actually protecting me from the sun. They are supposed to be there, but the coppers got a bit carried away and a bit overexcited and basically brought out the batons and just shot all of them. Which sometimes police are, they do that because they think they have to be police all the time, and they think like police. So the immune system is a little bit like that, right? So maybe just a bit of a hyperreactive reactionary police force going against some actually entirely legitimate protesters. Thank you very much. I don't know, bit of politics there.
Very subtle.
Anyway, I still don't know what vitamin D is. Where's the story here? Like, how does this all hang together? We've got.
I think I will read up to that more for next time.
It is almost like, you pull a little thread and then suddenly the whole ball unravels and you just end up with lots of pieces on the floor going, somehow this is supposed to make a coherent puzzle. Yeah. But like, they're not even the right, they're not even the same shapes. I think information's a big one. Sounds like I'd be interested in whether vitamin D, all of the things that it does then leads to things like inflammation. Because I guess my theory here is, or like my curiosity is like, how does this stuff track up through layers, and why do we bucket neurodiversity, right? Because at the moment we're ending up with a kind of view that says that neurodiversity is lots of little different behaviors, lots of little different things. But when we walk around, you and I, and meet someone, at some kind of event, a party or a pub or a business event, we shake hands and we talk for, a few minutes. Like within 30 seconds, we're like, aye, tribe, like we feel that they're neurodiverse. But if it's all different, what is it? Are we just feeling like, oh, you're not normal? Like that's not a compelling story for me. That we're like, oh, you're one of the not normal ones. Haha, I've noticed that. No, it's got to be the fact that we're kind of putting all these things under the same bucket, or that we want to put them under the same bucket, implies to me that there might well be some, there might be like a really large web of things coming to get, like influencing the body and lots of different expressions, but somewhere in the middle might be like a bottleneck funnel that goes, the reason that these all feel similar is that they're all being modulated through this impactful phenomena in the body, like for example inflammation, and then inflammation in different areas is like, okay, that's how you get it. But then when we're talking with someone, what we're basically going is, your tribe, which means, aha, I can sense your inflammation.
Yeah,
don't
I'm
know.
always very tempted to clarify things in terms of hormones. I'm also not sure about like sensing someone's inflammation, but sensing that someone has similar hormone levels than as you do makes a lot more sense to me, because it will, how do you say that? So there's a lot of party drugs, for example. Maybe it's a weird example, but what party drugs basically do is either let your body produce some kind of hormone or feed your body some kind of hormone or multiple hormones, which makes you behave and feel a certain way, because they are creating some hormone imbalances in your body that make you feel and behave in a certain way. And if you do a certain type of party drug, and other people do that as well, then you also experience that as being on the same level with those people, and not being on the same level with all the people that haven't had the same stuff, right? And that is the only thing that's happening there, is that there's a certain level of specific hormones in your body. That's the only thing that has changed. And that is the reason why you are connecting with these other people who have, at that point, the same hormone imbalances as you do, which makes a lot of sense to me. Because, I mean, so to me, that feels kind of similar to how I feel I connect with other people who also have autism or ADHD or something that kind of feels like they're on the same level. And it makes sense to me that they might have similar hormone disbalances as
I agree with that, but I'm like, I guess what I'm weirded out by, or what I'm curious about, is that if there are so many different triggers for neurodiversity, and like I think it's definitely the case that I resonate with some people on the neurodiversity spectrum like more than others, and some people I can recognize and be like, actually, we're not going to get on at all. Like, different autistic signatures, different autistic expressions, the different rigidities that we have can sometimes really clash. But then it's still neurodiversity, right? There's still this bucket of neurodiversity that we talk about, or do we just mean neurodiversity in the loosest sense, which means actually?
I don't know, but I think this could just be related to the point that it's a spectrum, that maybe people who are at a completely different point on the spectrum, so to say it, have very different ways of imbalance hormones, and those people might just be super annoying to you, whilst people who are who have the same
Or complementary.
ratios or complementary, sure.
Yeah, I guess there is one level as well that probably needs to be brought in. Is that if you struggle, if you have a neurological setup that means that you struggle for some reason in early social school settings, or communication settings with even parents, right? Then the thing that you have in common is that struggle. It's an experiential struggle. And from there, brains, people, minds have certain coping strategies that we bring in that are like more at the psychological level, like sort of self-protection mechanisms, ways of dealing with rejection or sensitivity. So, we become maybe hyper vigilant about other people's states so that we can be better at like masking and tuning in because we can't do it automatically for whatever reason. It doesn't matter why. It's like I've got one of the 15 known things that makes it hard to do this, but it doesn't matter. I still do this because I still struggle with this, and therefore I have to cope with it. And then maybe what we recognize in other people is like, you're making an effort to tune into me in the way that I'm making an effort to tune into you. We're going to get on fine because we're going to respect each other's needs to tune into each other. Whereas like the people that I struggle with on the autistic spectrum are the ones who really don't do that. They're just quite rigid in their stuff, and like they're not making any effort to, like I have some autistic people that I know in my life who, when we get on the phone, they're just like, hello. So the thing that we were talking about last time and that we said we would talk about, let's go into it. There's no like, how you doing? Or like, there's no care or any kind of awareness or botheringness about the relational stuff whatsoever. And they'll fight for being right over being any kind of relational. And they're like, I don't understand why you're being so irritated by this. I'm only speaking what's true. And it's like, yeah, but like your view on the world is utterly self-centered and it's not correct. It's only correct in your world. Anyway, I'm having a little whinge here. You can tell that I'm slightly irritated by these people. But at the same time, I actually really get on with them because we really get on at an autistic level. But there's like a relational dynamic that just pisses me off. And then different people respond to that when I bring it up or challenge them on it differently. And some of them are really rigid. But that's an example of how we can both be very much on the autistic spectrum, but have complicated experiences of rapport or, a fracture, like conflict. But it's very clear that we're still both neurodiverse. So, but then that's what I'm interested in. Is like, I wonder if there is a reflection. Like, why did some of us become, why did some of us choose different coping strategies? Like, is that completely arbitrary? Is that completely just a psychological experience? Is that really just a random choice? Or is it more likely that you choose a particular, like, for example, if I've got an autoimmune condition where I'm hyperflexible, am I more likely to be hypervigilant and tune in relationally because I'm already a bit wobbly? Like, how can I choose a rigid response? But then maybe I would choose a rigid response to make up for the fact that I feel inflexible. So someone else on the neurodiversity spectrum who maybe doesn't have hypermobility, maybe they respond more likely in a different type of rigidity, like maybe less a compensatory one, but more like a foundation one. So the hypothesis here, I guess, is that somatopsychic, like this stuff isn't psychosomatic. It's not that our bodies experience this because our minds think it. It's that there's something deeply going on, and that what we experience as a lived experience, psychologically, relationally, personally, spiritually, emotionally, who we feel we are as a person, actually is being massively driven by things that are really out of our control in the moment. Like, it's like, it's really hard to not have RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, if your norepinephrine levels mean that you have to treat all these interactions through a fear response instead of thinking about it some other way. It's like, well, there you go. You got a psychology there that's straight away going to be really difficult to be around with, like, and also really difficult to experience. And you're like, I wish I could change this, but you're not going to think yourself out of a norepinephrine imbalance, like that's not going to work. You might have to manage it. Yeah. So there's a question of management and like, how do you build your life to support that? Do you take supplements? I mean, I'm definitely going to be necking more vitamin D3. I mean, I already do the D3 K3 because, people in the gym go, oh, it's amazing. But maybe that's why. Maybe they're all autistic. They've discovered this and they're like, yeah, I'm doing it because of the body. It's like, actually, mate, the reason that's working for you is that, or maybe D3 is like just that good because it influences so many things. So it's just positive all round and it happens to work really well for neurodiversity or autism. because it's just really good for us in so many ways, and that's just one of them. I don't know. There's something about I'm still on the hunt, and I always will be, for how does the lived experience and the physicality, and then what that means for how we can live better. So we do inflammation next time then.
Yeah, and then I'm also going to read up to what vitamin D3 does.
Can I put into that mix then is it K2? There's a thing where it's often considered good to put to have D3 and K2. They often come together, or they're often recommended together in the weightlifting world. And you get supplements that put them together. The other one, there was another one I was thinking. I recently came across some stuff that was saying that if you've got ADHD and you have coffee and L-theanine, L-theanine together, then this is basically like taking non-amphetaminic and amphetaminic. It's basically like ADHD meds, but without the amphetamine side of it. Like that, it has a really positive impact on ADHD symptoms in the same way that amphetamine-based medication does, but without the side effects of amphetamine-based medication.
Okay, kind of makes sense, because I do know that caffeine makes your brain more dopamine sensitive, so it doesn't release it doesn't release dopamines like ADHD medication does, but it does make your brain more dopamine sensitive.
That's so fascinating, because I didn't drink coffee until I was 40. And I only started drinking it because I heard that it was quite good for ADHDers. And I'm like doing the startup, and I was like, I've spent years hunting for the right type of tea when everyone else is having coffee that can like energize me. And I eventually bit the bullet and was like, I hate coffee. And then I just tried it and found some really good coffee and sort of got into it through a really vanilla milky route. But it worked. And now I really do drink coffee, and I think it has a very positive impact on my day at times. If I have it too late, though, I get real bad jitters in my heart. Like my heart feels really like fizzy and wrong. It's weird. So I think there are side effects and consequences, right? And anxiety and panic attacks increase with caffeine. So it's not like a silver bullet, but I think there's some interesting medicational uses for it at times. Gotta love a bit of self-medication.
Supplementation.
Call it what you will. Externally augmented self-regulation, mate, is entirely justifiable.
It sounds terrible. It's not your bad excuse.
It's what we do, though. Thanks for listening to our podcast today. If you like what we're talking about and want to hear more, do like, follow, and subscribe. It makes a really big difference. You can also find us on social media and our Patreon, Al and Meryl, or our website, alandmeryl.com. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.